Hello, friends. Welcome back to Behind the Curtain. This is the Steve and Dave series in which we talk about the makers and doers, the people who were shaking up the music scene, who weren't out on stage and weren't the lead singers and the frontmen. Producers.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Producers,
yes.
but today's a little different in that we are going to talk about someone who did have a career in front of the curtain, but whose influence, and the influence we really want to talk about, was much more sort of behind the scenes. I mean, I think we'll make our argument that this person was as influential in the music scene in the mid to late '60s, particularly in California, as anyone. And so, Dave, you want to introduce our person of note today?
Right. Today we're going to be talking about Cass Elliot, also known as Mama Cass, 1/4 of the pop folk group, the Mamas and the Papas.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
she has influence far beyond the Mamas and Papas because she was an extremely social person, an extremely charismatic person, and many people were drawn to her, and she became kind of the center of a type of Californian salon.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Cass Elliot is a person who had a charisma that people were drawn to. People felt comfortable with her in a way that's almost sort of inexplicable. You'll have people describe their initial meeting with Cass Elliot as like someone that they had known for forever, right? And that Cass had a kind of an emotional intelligence that allowed her to connect with people very, very quickly. But I would also say, I think, seemed very, very deeply. And she also had an ability, right, to get people together. As you were, Dave, as you're suggesting, she brought people who seemingly had very kind of disparate personalities and brought them together, and they found a kind of connection. And so she's a really interesting person, and someone I think who is, I think to a large degree kind of overlooked today. So I guess just getting started with Cass just for a moment, we should note that she wasn't born into into an entertainment family. She was born on the East Coast. She was born in Maryland, and she was born Ellen Cohen, and she had a big voice, a big presence, and again a lot of charm, a lot of personality, and that was apparent from the very beginning. And she made her way through high school, performing in local events, local theater and stage productions, and eventually, of course, then she made her way to New York. I guess a word about her name. Ellen Cohen took on the name Cass Elliot, in part because she was influenced by an actress, a stage actress named Peggy Cass. Now, Dave, I don't know, does Peggy Cass ring a bell to you at all?
I have heard that name. But I really don't know where I have seen her.
Yeah, and I remember Peggy Cass not from her stage work, but she was in fact the kind of go-to game show panelist for decades. And that's how I knew Peggy Cass. But Peggy Cass made an enormous imprint on Cass Elliot. And then the Elliot comes from a friend that she knew who passed away with the name Elliot. And so she became Cass Elliot for the rest of her life. We should talk a little bit about the Mamas and Papas. I mean, I think that's really for most people one of the more important moments in Cass Elliot's life. I think it was a defining period in her life for both good and bad. And this is how the world really was introduced to her. And so maybe I'm going to talk a little bit about the Mamas and Papas. the personalities.
She, Cass Elliot had been involved in several music groups, folk groups for the most part, coming up into that. The Big Three, and again, for some reason, Cass, who was, of course, a large woman, she was fat, ends up in groups and making records that could be understood as unflattering references to fatness. The Big Three being the first. I believe the Big Three is where she first met Denny.
I think that's right. That's right.
In any case, she went on to be in a group called the Wumpugs. With him, fell in love with him. Of course, he's Denny has the tenor voice that was so distinctive in the Mamas and Papas.
That's right.
But through Denny, she got to know the Phillips.
Yeah.
And they went down. They were in Jamaica for a while together, playing clubs. Although it was a while before Cass actually started singing with them. She went down to join them in the club and worked as a waitress first.
That's right.
Because John Phillips was a dick. And,
okay, so here we should. Okay, there we go. So yeah, John Phillips. I mean, John Phillips is he was the leader of the Mamas and Papas. I think that's safe to say.
I think that's safe to say.
He was the primary songwriter, composer, arranger. He was the alpha, I guess, in the group, and he was a notoriously sort of difficult person. He was. I mean, you describe him as a dick. That's probably right. But I think Phillips had a very specific idea about how a group should look, to be blunt. And Cass Elliot didn't necessarily fit that group. But Cass Elliot had, really a golden voice, and her voice melded so well with the voices of others. I mean, she had an ability to tune in and harmonize with people that it's almost supernatural. She's just an incredible talent. And the other thing that Cass brought was an effervescent personality and stage presence and, again, charisma that, frankly, the others didn't have. And to his credit, I think, John Phillips recognized this. He recognized the attributes that Cass, in fact, brought to the table. And
well, I think that's true, but I also don't think in the end that he was the only person who had a say on this, because I think frankly don't think that Denny or Michelle would have been okay with not having her in the group.
I think that would be my
Michelle Phillips said as much. She said there's a story that Cass had to beg to get into the group, and it's just not true. She was clearly a super talent, and we needed her. And the idea that John was going to somehow maybe not have her in was not ever on the table.
Yeah, because in the end, John Phillips wanted to sell records, right? And John Phillips wanted to be successful, and Cass was the necessary ingredient. She was the
there is a story
yeah,
to kind of explain the delay in her joining the group in a way that doesn't make anyone look bad. That's the copper pipe story. Are you familiar with that?
No, go. Why don't you go ahead with it?
Really?
Yeah.
Supposedly, while they were down in Jamaica, there was work being done on the club, construction work, and Cass walked under scaffolding, and somebody dropped a copper pipe on her head, knocked her to the ground. She had a concussion. When she came out of the hospital, she noticed that she could sing 3 notes higher. She had gained 3 notes. And all of a sudden, of course, that's a talent that you can't pass up. So,
well, I'm unfamiliar with that story, but well, there you have it. It's there was something special about Cass. That's to be, So we should talk a little bit the Mamas and Papas and their appeal. Mamas and Papas were only together for really 2.5 years, and they were I think by almost any measure, a massively successful group, selling millions of records, millions of singles in particular. California Dreamin', Monday, and Creeque Alley, for example, just to
I saw her again.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you consider 2.5 years and all of the hits that they produced in that short time, it's incredible. You break that down on a weekly basis or whatever. It's really incredible. It's
extraordinary. And say what you will about John Phillips, he understood the recording industry. He understood what a good song was. He could write a good song. He could arrange a good song. And the Mamas and Papas, working with Lou Adler, legendary Hollywood or music industry producer. I mean, they were a magic. The other thing about the Mamas and Papas, and is that they were, in their own way, very telegenic, and that became particularly important in the 60s, right, as we're really moving into an era where television becomes massively important. And they make appearances after, Ed Sullivan and all the talk shows. They were a ubiquitous presence on American television during their short life together. And they had I want to be careful about this, but they had a very unique look, right? You have Michelle Phillips is this incredible beauty, right? Just stunning beauty. Denny Doherty, this handsome man. John Phillips gives the group a kind of street cred when it comes to the alternative scene. He looks like a beatnik, looks like a hippie. And then you have Cass, who is, she's a very big woman in an era where big women just weren't in the entertainment field. You didn't see big women on television. And
she would, of course, always wear these tents.
Big clothes, yeah.
But they were colorful, psychedelic, flower child sort of stuff. So at least it was a time that if you're going to be walking around in something that requires a lot of material, that material is also easy.
Cass Elliot and her weight it was something that troubled her. She was prone to wild dietary regimens and frankly wild fluctuations in weight.
And that's probably what killed her in the end.
Yeah, what killed her weakened her heart. And so it's just part of Cass's story. I guess to sort of wrap up the Mamas and Papas, though, they're kind of introduced to the world in a way. That's maybe overstated, but Monterey Pop Festival in '67 was an enormous event, bringing together groups as disparate as The Who, Jimi Hendrix, and 11 Spoonful, Mamas and Papas. And for so many people, when people think about the Monterey Pop Festival, they think about it as a kind of, hello world, we're the Mamas and Papas, but really it was the end. That by that point, that group had largely, it had corroded. It had gone as far as it could go. Cass was chafing at Phillips' leadership, John Phillips' leadership. John Phillips was a cruel person as well.
This is as a footnote to the Monterey Pop Festival. John, of course, wrote, If You're Going to San Francisco, which Scott McKenzie recorded. And that was basically an advertising jingle for the Monterey Pop Festival.
Oh, absolutely.
Essentially.
Absolutely right.
A lot of people actually did end up going to San Francisco because of that song.
Yeah, it's I think if you're interested in learning more about this era and learning more about the kind of blossoming of the counterculture and flower power, read more about the Monterey Pop Festival. It's a very, very interesting event, very important event. Phillips, John,
and or watch it.
And or watch it. Yeah, yeah. I mean, but the Monterey Pop Festival, among other things, created a charitable foundation that still exists, based upon the revenue generated by the records and by the film. I mean, it's still residuals are still being money still being made, and that charitable foundation still exists. I mean, that's, I think, quite remarkable just in and of itself. But we should probably transition. We should probably transition to a place in California, a place in Los Angeles that is really seminal to this era, and it's a location known as Laurel Canyon. Laurel Canyon and the mid to late '60s. I mean, it's synonymous with singer-songwriters. It's synonymous with creativity, and Cass Elliot is in the middle of it. So maybe we could do. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, and in that area, it's also referenced in several songs.
Yes.
The Doors' "Love Street," and even one of the Mamas and Papas, "Young Girls Coming to the Canyon," something like that. There was.
That's it.
I don't remember. Do you remember the name of the song?
Oh, I don't remember the name of the song.
Okay, but
the John Phillips song, but it's
they're talking about Laurel Canyon.
Yeah, these young girls come to the canyon. Debauchery. Joni Mitchell's "Ladies of the Canyon." I mean, there's just dozens of these songs, and Laurel Canyon is this place that is it's a real place, but it's also a place of imagination. And I just, if you'll just humor me for just a second, for me, I found this useful in that. And many of you all know this, right? That you're familiar with Los Angeles, and you're familiar with Los Angeles as a city that is, in fact, of course, on the ocean, on the Pacific, but it's also a city that is bisected by a number of mountain ranges. So you have this interesting combination of mountains, plain, and coast, and not many places have that, but that's one of the things that makes LA really important. If you think about Los Angeles, though, you'll note that amongst the more important places in LA will be places like Hollywood, which we're all familiar with, and then maybe you can see it with my cursor here, Studio City, relatively close to Hollywood. What's in between Studio City, where a lot of stuff was on television and the movies was put together, and Hollywood, which we're familiar with, is Laurel Canyon. It's essentially, you've got a mountain range here, and splitting the mountain range is this right here, Laurel Canyon, a road that goes up and over the mountain range, and along which then people starting in the 1930s, mostly Hollywood types, began to move into, because among other things, it was so close to where they were working, whether they were working in the Studio City area or whether they're working in Hollywood itself. You were only just a few minutes from work, yet you were living in a very isolated, almost pristine area, Laurel Canyon.
What was it that Joni Mitchell said about it? She was looking for a place where she could just be as free as possible, and she heard something about the craziest people on earth live in Los Angeles, and the crazy people among them live in Laurel Canyon.
That's right.
And the crazy Laurel Canyon inhabitants live on this street that she ended up buying a house on.
It's extraordinary. And so if you can imagine, Laurel Canyon is a road and a series of roads that shoot off of it, very, very narrow, very, very steep, very, very remote in its own way. And so to be in Laurel Canyon meant that you were almost in complete isolation. Joni Mitchell, for example, also writes about opening her windows and being able to hear coyotes and guitars, right? As people who are jamming, and then you can hear the wildlife. So it's a very curious place. Now, Cass Elliot, like so many people, so many creative people in the 60s, the music industry, migrated to California, migrated to Laurel Canyon. And there were, I mean, there are dozens of people who made their way to Laurel Canyon in the mid to late 60s. I guess amongst the first musicians, at least, would be the Byrds, Chris Hillman, Roger McGuinn, David Crosby, among others, that settled in Laurel Canyon and made it big. But then you had Springfield, and so the
Stephen Stills, Neil Young,
Richie Furay. You met the aforementioned Joni Mitchell. You've got, and it's, I think, worth noting, you got people again like Neil Young. You've got the Monkees. When really
Peter Tork, anyway.
Peter Tork in particular, Mickey Dolenz, and Cass Elliott's in the mix. Again, Cass's place, particularly on Woodrow Wilson Drive, becomes quite famous. Here's an image of it. Dave, you want to just talk? So it's like 1968, and it's Cass Elliott's. What's happening at Cass's place?
Well, okay, and this was essentially, or at least most of the history of this house under Cass Elliot took place after the Mamas and Papas split up.
No, that's right, absolutely.
And this was a house that originally was bought by, help me out here, Natalie Wood.
Yes.
For her family, for her parents, after the success of Rebel Without a Cause.
Yeah, young Natalie Wood, yeah.
But she eventually moved out. I think there was some, this house has belonged to a number of celebrities since it was built. I think the last one was Robbie Williamson.
Robbie Williams, yeah. This is
Robbie Williams.
Yeah, this is also, I think,
Dan Aykroyd.
Dan Aykroyd, yeah. This is the Dan Aykroyd. This is one of the places that Dan Aykroyd was convinced was haunted. Dan Aykroyd, a noted, UFO, and well, this is where Dan Aykroyd wrote about Ghostbusters. I mean, this is the house that inspired Ghostbusters. So it's a famous place. It also, we can't see it in this image, but it also had a pool, which, among other things, really attracted David Crosby. That was one of the things that drew Crosby to Cass's, because he liked to hang out in the pool.
David Crosby and Mama Cass were very close. And depending on which member of Crosby, Stills, and Nash you ask, a couple of them will say that they met around Mama Cass's kitchen table. And that's the first time that they harmonized together. Yeah,
so right. It's a very famous and somewhat disputed story, but I think what Cass Elliot was instrumental in them getting together. Graham Nash, right, tells the story about meeting Cass and about, again, Cass bringing Graham, who was in town with the Hollies, bringing Cass, to our place. I mean, there are, dozens of stories like this with people getting together because, Cass said, hey, why don't you come over? I mean, Cass Elliot's place was a kind of a place to hang, right? So people would just show up. She had the pool.
Oh, no, wait, just one second about that.
Go ahead.
It had the typical crash pad appeal, but she said, it was never so that you just had people coming in and crashing there, just
no, that's
staying
right.
over or anything like that.
Right.
And she said, and I always wanted people to call before they came, which was also not typical. So it wasn't just people just dropping by. But
that's a fair point.
But there were things. Even were planned. She would order large delicatessen platters and things like that for David Crosby, so they'd have something to eat while they're hanging out in the pool. And sometimes dozens of people would be there at any given
yeah.
time.
Yeah, these are big events, and everybody makes note. There was always food at Cass's place.
And half of those people had guitars.
Yeah, so right, and so people would, and this is when people talk about Laurel Canyon, they talk about that when people would walk with their guitars, drive with their guitars. They would show up with their guitars. In many cases in Laurel Canyon, people live close enough to each other that they would just simply walk down the street. But right, it was an era of creativity, and there was a certain people were open about sharing things that they were working on. People, to contribute, just to get some feedback. It was a very, very open, very, very kind of accepting environment. And so at Cass's place, people would be there with guitars. There's
a lot of collaboration, a lot of people finding people to work with, and as we said, at least in the case of CSN, a band came together because they met at Cass's place.
That's exactly right. The California and Laurel Canyon was introduced to Joni Mitchell at Cass's place. David Crosby had met Joni Mitchell in Florida. Joni was just getting started. David produced her first album, also convinced her to come to California. She did. He took her over to Cass.
Did Graham Nash and Joni Mitchell meet?
I may have met there. It seems likely that they would have met there. I know.
It does seem like it.
But
anyway, I'm not entirely clear about that.
But I mean, it's certainly a relationship that flowered.
They were both part of her circle anyway.
And when Joni first came to Cass's place, there's the story about Eric Clapton, right? Joni Mitchell's on the grass in Cass's yard playing a couple songs. Joni Mitchell tunes her guitar very uniquely. She has a very, very interesting tuning strategy, and Eric Clapton, who was there, never had seen or heard anything like it. They had these images of Clapton just sitting on the ground, staring at her guitar, staring at her tuning, trying to figure out what the hell she's doing. I mean,
David Crosby looks on like the cat that ate the canary, and
that's Crosby, which is he's quite that the cat ate the canary. Yeah, Crosby's always he's always
in a different perspective of that same scene. Nicky Dolenz filming it with a hand.
That's right.
So
it's just it's at Cass's place.
Yes,
everything happens at her place. People get together at her place. People feel comfortable to share new songs at her place. It's a place to meet. It's a place to share. It's a place to hang. Famously, right? Cass's living room. Cass was an idiosyncratic housekeeper at best, right? But people wrote their name. The wall of her living room was full of sayings and signatures. Everybody, who was there,
telephone numbers.
Exactly. On
things like that.
Wall. Yeah.
On the wall.
It's
everybody that was a name in the pop and rock scene in Los Angeles was there at some point, and it seems like. But and I think there's that interesting story that Michelle Phillips tells. You want to relate?
Well, go ahead. This is. I believe this is at Cass's first place. I think Cass lived at 3 places in Laurel Canyon. I think this is
okay. All right.
This is still during the Mamas and Papas era, but go ahead.
Yeah, we talked about idiosyncratic housekeeping. Michelle Phillips went over to visit Cass Elliot, and she wasn't home.
Yeah.
It was just chaos. Everything was a mess. She walked into the kitchen, and there was an industrial-sized jar of mayonnaise.
These gigantic jars. I think we've all seen them. Yeah.
That restaurants use.
Exactly, yeah.
Fallen off a table and broken on the floor in the kitchen, and had been left there.
Been there a while. Yes.
And this is one of the things that humanized Michelle Phillips for me. That was the first thing.
Me too.
She cleaned it up. She just cleaned up the entire place. She said she needed 3 hours. cleaned up, and then left, and apparently never even mentioned that she had been the one to do it. But wow,
That's right. But that's, I mean, that's sort of Cass being Cass, right? That as you mentioned, Dave, that you know, you didn't just, you know, pop in at Cass's. You called, you know, you let her know what was up. But she was kind of free and easy. This is also the time in Laurel Canyon where she's beginning to shed the Mama Cass label.
right.
It's I believe it's Elliot who insists that the people in the Mamas and Papas take on the Mama Papa name, right? Papa John.
She was the first one to come up with that. They were watching television together, and somehow the Tonight Show. I can't imagine. Apparently, some Hell's Angels were on the Tonight Show, and they were saying, you know, people put our ladies down. They think they're just cheap whores. We call them our mamas.
Mamas.
And Cass said, "Oh, I'm a mama."
Yeah. Well,
That's how it started.
You're
Yeah.
Papa. Yeah. And so,
Yeah.
but the label Mama Cass, you know, it was it became almost a kind of almost became derogatory. It didn't help that her record company put out an album, Mama Cass's Big Ones. And it was just, you know, it was no longer a label that she felt really comfortable with. And so this is the point at which she's trying to sort of shed that Mama label and be known as Cass. And it's interesting then, you know, past the kind of quintessential Laurel Canyon period, was moving into the 70s, that Cass Elliot then begins to break free and become a kind of dynamic figure in entertainment.
She's omnipresent. It's really everywhere on entertainment television. Johnny Cash show.
She is everywhere. You're right. So Johnny Cash show.
Doing sketches with Carol Burnett.
She appeared with the young John Denver. I mean, she had the ability, because of her musical talent.
She had 2 specials of her own, in fact.
That's exactly right.
So
That's exactly right. And she was really, I think, on the precipice of really, I think, incredible stardom. I mean, she had so many gifts in her, you know, personality or charm or warmth. She was quick on her feet, and she, you know, very, and quite frankly, she was distinctive looking. But that obviously all came to an end in April of '74 when she died in London of a heart attack. She was in, and Dave, you know, you can maybe finish the story. She was in London, staying in the flat of
Harry Nilsson.
Yeah, Harry Nilsson. And that's
she had a 2-week engagement at the Troubadour, is that?
Oh, it was, I think it was maybe the Palladium.
Palladium, that's it.
Yeah.
At the Palladium in London. Many of the shows were booked out, and and she had the evening before she died. She had called Michelle Phillips and was just ecstatic.
Exactly.
2 shows in a row with standing ovations. And just to mention it real briefly, her first outing as a non-Mama and Papa singer was in Las Vegas at Caesar's Palace. And she didn't do well at all. It was, she bombed. She was also there for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. She had been engaged for 3 weeks. After the first night, they took her off the bill and just released her from her contract.
Right. Yeah. It was. Yeah. It was
and it was universally panned, this performance, and so it really set her back. So the fact that she had come back so strongly, and was selling out shows internationally.
Absolutely, that's right.
Standing ovations. That was, of course, for her, an incredible confirmation of the direction she was going in.
I think that's a key point. And so she was just hitting her stride, just feeling really great about herself, confidence, and it seemed as though the entertainment world was welcoming her with open arms.
Well, she went to a party at Mick Jagger's after that call. So Michelle Phillips talks to an incredibly happy woman, an ecstatic woman, and then the next thing she hears the next morning is Cass is dead.
Yeah, and this is it was a tragic loss. She died in her early 30s. It was
She was 32 years old, and just to give a little macabre bit of trivia. 4 years later, Keith Moon died in that same bed.
Same bed.
At 32.
Yeah. The Harry Nielsen apartment has had bad vibes surrounding it from that point on. It's the thing about, I guess, though, when we think about Cass Elliot, she just seems very human, right? I think the thing about that people enjoyed about her related to her somehow. I think we all feel insecure. We all feel that we're not really accepted. I think people could, even if I think Cass's weight and her physical appearance, people connected to it on some level because she wasn't perfect, right? She didn't fit this kind of perfect ideal. And there she was, she gamely pushing on, and I think people really appreciated that. And people were really drawn to her, and people just really felt a certain kind of warmth to Cass that I don't know that was shared by a lot of people of that era, popular singers. I mean, people just had genuine affection for her.
Well, a lot of people said that she was the most charismatic person that they knew.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think part of her appeal was the fact that you had the sense that she was a good person, a nice person, someone that you could accessible in a way that most pop singers probably weren't.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, and so I think Dave and I, when we've been talking about this series and just talking about people that we should focus on, we came to Cass right away for a variety of reasons, and she is as a really, again, an enormously influential figure in the music industry. And
Graham Nash called her the Gertrude Stein of Laurel Canyon.
Yeah, I think that's apt. And she was central. She was the figure that brought people together and helped to make Laurel Canyon and to make LA the place to be in the world when it came to music in the late 1960s. I think without question. And so it's been really I think a pleasure and frankly on some level kind of an honor to talk a little about her, because again I think she's largely forgotten today, but she was so important. So Dave, you got a final thought about Cass as we wrap up our conversation?
Maybe just a little anecdote about the sort of appeal that she had. Andy Warhol did a screen test with Mama Cass.
Yeah.
And of course he did screen tests. To be screen tested by Warhol meant that you were already celebrity.
That's right. Yeah, that was. Yeah.
But he didn't screen test Michelle Phillips. He screen tested Mama Cass, and there was a plan to do a film with her, Mama Cass, and some beautiful young men, with beauty being the central motif of the
Yeah,
and Beautiful People or something like that was the planned title. It never came to fruition, but those two, Mama Cass and Andy Laurel, had certainly had a mutual admiration society going on. And just, you talked about her emotional IQ, her EQ. I think that's
yeah.
But she also had an IQ of 190.
Yeah, legendary intelligence. It's you know, I guess just give me the mind races actually had Cass Elliot lived. I mean, you could have imagined her doing a variety of things in the latter years of her life. I mean, she was a woman who was so able to connect with people, and she had such, you know, raw intelligence and such emotional intelligence. I mean, why wouldn't she enter politics? I mean, you could imagine a variety of scenarios where a Cass Elliot could have really been.
She was very, very active in the McGovern campaign in '72. Yes, she was interested in politics. She was interested in acting. Her first presence on a stage was in a musical.
That's right.
She had done acting. That was her first public appearances. So she was interested in acting. She was interested in producing. She might have gone behind the curtain in a different sense.
Oh, absolutely.
So there's really no point. She was moving away from the folk pop and going into a different type of music.
That she was. Yeah,
but she was making hits right up until the end, and again, she died at the peak of her popularity.
She certainly did, and again, for a variety of reasons. I mean, her passing is just remarkably tragic, but her life is worth celebrating, worth remembering, because she was such a pivotal figure in the music scene in this era, and just somebody that we should not forget. And so,
while we're at it, we should just put the urban legend to rest about how she died, because it is it's very persistent, and a lot of people who know about Cass think that she died because the first doctor who examined her was quoted in the papers saying that she had choked on a ham sandwich. That's how she died. And oh, well, that's how a fat lady would die, right? She'd die.
Yeah, immediately.
Best, which was eating.
Yeah.
Because there was a ham sandwich next to the bed that apparently she had been eating or whatever. But the actual obituary showed that she had died because of a heart attack. And she had been doing these extreme diets, as Steve mentioned earlier, for a number of years. She lost 100, she was 300 pounds, lost 100 pounds of that in preparation for Las Vegas. Extreme stuff.
And extreme stuff. And
it weakened her heart, and that's what she died of.
Yeah, and so the post-mortem revealed, it was in fact a heart attack, but the choking on the sandwich, it lingers today, and there's a certain it's cruel. I mean, it's
well, there are even popular cultural songs and stories and poems and stuff that reference that death, the Cass ham sandwich thing.
Yes, it's an awful thing, and but I'm glad we're able to, in our own little way, to try to dispel that. Cass Elliot was a remarkable figure, and so it's we look forward to talking more about figures that are, behind the curtain, people that you may not know well or maybe you never heard of, and it's we enjoy doing this, and so we will get a chance to do this again. I'm real sure. So
yeah, so check out our other videos, either our 50 years ago this month series or Behind the Curtain. Here is a playlist. We're going to put up some Cass Elliot songs, some Mom and Poppin' songs to go along with this. Here is our other, our previous attempt at Behind the Curtain with George Martin. And you can subscribe to Steve and Dave here.
Right. So, excellent. So thanks. We'll see you next time.